It started with something simple. A cardboard box. Dusty. Untouched. Tucked behind old curtains and winter coats in the attic, the kind of place most people avoid unless they're moving or grieving. I wasn't doing either. It was early April, the first bright day after weeks of gray. I was cleaning the house out of restlessness, maybe guilt. My husband David was away visiting his sister in Colorado. My son Theo was finishing his master's degree in Boston. The silence felt heavier than usual. When I opened that attic door and pulled the string to light the single bulb, I didn't expect to find my entire past sitting inside a box that looked like every other piece of clutter up there. But there it was. A brown banker's box sealed with yellowed masking tape, the kind I'd used back when I was in college. I knew it before I touched it. My fingers tingled. I had hidden that box, and I had promised myself never to open it again. I don't remember carrying it downstairs. I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed staring at the thing like it might detonate. And in a way it did. I peeled off the brittle tape slowly like skin. Inside were a few notebooks, a cloth-bound journal, and a tiny green envelope with no name on it. The first thing I noticed was the smell-aged paper, old perfume, and something faintly acidic. Memory. The journal on top wasn't mine. I could tell by the neat, deliberate handwriting. Mine had always been rushed, especially in college when emotions were sharp and time felt short. I opened it to the first page. She thinks no one knows. But I do. I saw the way she clutched her stomach in December. I heard the whispers in the hallway. I'm not judging her. I just don't understand how a girl can vanish for a whole year and come back with dead eyes. I read it again. Then again. The date, June 1987. The name signed at the bottom, Rachel Ellison, my college roommate. I sat completely still. The walls felt closer. I could hear the ticking of the hallway clock downstairs. Rachel. I hadn't thought of her in years. We were close once. Then one day we weren't. She moved out in the middle of a semester. I never asked why. But now I remembered what she had walked in on me, hunched over the toilet, holding my abdomen, crying into a towel. I thought she had left to escape my depression. Turns out she knew. She knew enough. The journal had entries about me. Not cruel, not angry. Just observations. Pieced together like a puzzle she had been too scared to finish. I felt naked reading it. Her mother visited once. Cold woman. Didn't even ask how Marianne was feeling. Just handed her a folded paper and told her to be ready by Friday. I remembered that Friday. Vividly. My mother's silver Buick. The motel off I-95. The doctor who didn't ask questions. The silence afterward. The year I vanished from school, from life. My hand trembled as I put the journal down. And that's when I noticed the envelope again. Green. Unmarked. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph. Faded, soft-edged. A baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. She couldn't have been more than a week old. I stopped breathing. There was no name on the back. But I knew. I knew like you know your own breath. Her. I hadn't seen this picture in years. Maybe I had blocked it out. But she was real. She had always been real. Not a dream. Not a nightmare. Flesh and blood. I had carried her. I had given birth to her. And I had given her away. I leaned back, eyes burning, the photograph clutched tight against my chest, like it might fly away if I let go. I whispered her name aloud for the first time in years, Ella. It felt like a sin to say it. Like breaking some pact I made with my mother all those years ago. No one knew. Not David. Not Theo. Not even my sister, whom I told everything except this. Because this was the one truth I had promised to bury. But the thing about secrets, they don't rot away. They sit. They wait. And when they resurface, they're heavier than ever. I sat there for hours. I reread every journal entry. I stared at Ella's photo until the ink felt like it might lift from the paper. And I thought, maybe it's time. Maybe I've punished myself long enough. Maybe the truth has waited too long in the dark. I placed everything back in the box, the journal, the envelope, the photo, but not to hide it again. Not this time. Instead, I left the box on the chair across from my bed, where I'd have to look at it every night, like a clock ticking down to a truth I could no longer ignore. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept waking to flashes of her face or what I imagined her face would look like now. Would she have my hair? His eyes? Would she walk like me with that nervous half-hitch in her step? Or maybe she'd inherited his composure, cold, precise, unreadable. I tried to remember his voice, but it had faded. All I could recall were moments. The way he looked at me when no one was watching. The way my mother looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching. God, the layers of that time. The next morning, I opened the journal again and reread Rachel's entries not because I needed to, but because I wanted to know what she had seen. What had I looked like from the outside? She came home late again, eyes red, her hair wet from rain or maybe the shower. She didn't speak, just crawled under the blanket and faced the wall. There's something brittle about her now, like she could break with a single word. It was strange reading about myself as if I were a character in someone else's book. I hadn't realized I'd looked that broken, and yet I had been. At 19, I had thought I understood love. I thought it was about intensity, about secrets, about surviving the world together. But it wasn't. Not when the man was nearly twice your age. Not when he was married to your mother. Not when his hand lingered too long on your back at Sunday dinner, and your mother turned a blind eye because the illusion of a perfect life meant more than the safety of her daughter. No one knew what happened behind our doors. They saw us, my mother's stepfather and me, and called us a respectable family. But no one saw how silence became survival. I didn't even have a word for what happened until much later in life. Now I know what it was. Now I can say it plainly. He groomed me. He made me feel seen, special, like I wasn't just someone's awkward daughter but a woman. And when my mother suspected she didn't confront him, she confronted me. You're going to ruin this family, Marianne. Do you understand what you're doing? Like I had seduced him, like I held the power. That's when the arrangement began. The disappearance, the motel, the clinic, the birth, the giving away. A clean break, she called it. And I never saw her again. Not Rachel, not the girl I had roomed with. She vanished from my life just as I did. But now I knew she had known all along. There was one last line I hadn't noticed the first time I skimmed the final page. One day someone will ask her about that year, and I hope she doesn't lie. I hope she tells them everything. I closed the journal gently like it was still alive, and I whispered, I'm ready. That was the first moment I believed myself. It was 2 days later when I brought the box downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. That same table where my son had done his homework, where we celebrated birthdays and signed Christmas cards. Now it was an altar to my silence. David had returned from Colorado. We were sitting across from each other after dinner when I said, I have something I need to show you. He looked at me with that gentle, puzzled expression he always wore when I spoke too softly, like he was afraid he'd misheard me. I slid the box toward him. He opened it slowly, unsure. When he reached the photo, he stopped. He stared at the baby picture, then looked up at me. Who is she? He asked. And I said it for the first time out loud with the full weight of truth behind it. She's my daughter. I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, not disbelief, but a quiet heartbreak. He didn't speak. I waited. I didn't know you. He began but stopped himself. You never said. No, I said. I didn't. And then I told him everything. Not just the pregnancy, not just the adoption, but the man, the betrayal, the way my mother had orchestrated it all to protect her image, not me. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, I wish you had told me. I know, I whispered. I wish I had too. He didn't touch the photo again. He just nodded once and stood. He walked to the sink and stared out the window like he was trying to find a new version of me in the trees beyond the glass. We didn't sleep in the same bed that night. Not out of anger, out of distance. A new, unfamiliar distance. The kind that comes when someone you love suddenly becomes a stranger carrying a life you never knew they lived. The next morning, I opened my laptop. I logged into my DNA Ancestry account. It was something Theo had gifted me 2 years ago, thinking it would be fun to trace our roots. And that's when I saw it. A new match. Her name was listed only as E. Harper. Estimated relationship daughter, very high confidence. My heart stopped. My hands began to tremble. There she was, Ella, grown, alive, looking. And I had no idea what to do next. When I was 19, I disappeared. That's what people said later, whispering behind library shelves or at the edge of dorm room doors. She dropped out. Maybe she had a breakdown. She just vanished. But I hadn't vanished. I'd been taken. Not in the dramatic way of movies, no. I had been taken in quiet ways through persuasion, manipulation, guilt. And when I was no longer useful, I was erased. I remember the exact moment I knew I was pregnant. It was a cold morning in December. The first frost had stuck to the campus sidewalks. I was walking across the courtyard halfway to my literature seminar when a sudden wave of nausea hit me so violently I had to grip a lamppost to stay upright. I barely made it to the dorm bathroom. Rachel found me slumped by the toilet, pale and shivering. She offered to call someone, maybe the campus nurse, but I shook my head. I couldn't risk it. Later that day, I bought a test. I did it alone, hiding in a gas station bathroom off Route 17. Positive. That little blue plus sign cracked my world open. I went back to the dorm, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my arms around my knees. There were no good choices. Not when the father of the baby was my stepfather. Not when my own mother would sooner call me a liar than confront the man sleeping beside her. And she didn't. Not even when I told her. That Christmas I came home. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and I told her everything, or enough of it. Her face didn't change. Not once. She stood up, walked to the stove, stirred the pot of stew she was making, and said, "You're not keeping it." I remember thinking, maybe she didn't hear me right, but she had. My stepfather never entered the room during that conversation, and from that day forward, he never looked me in the eye again. A week later, she handed me a manila envelope with a train ticket, $1,000 in cash, and a one-way bus schedule to a place I had never been, a boarding house in North Carolina. "Stay with this woman," she said. "She'll keep quiet." I didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even Rachel, not my professors, not my friends. I disappeared. And in that cold, gray January, I began the loneliest year of my life. The boarding house was run by a woman named Iris, a stout, church-going widow in her 60s, who didn't ask questions. I had my own room, barely bigger than a closet, a single bed, a sink, and a small window that looked out over a gravel driveway. There was no television, no phone. I wrote in journals, took long walks, and stared at my reflection until my belly began to show. I thought about writing Rachel. I almost did once. But what would I say? "Hey, sorry for being weird that semester. I was carrying my stepfather's child. Hope your finals went well." No, that wasn't a letter I knew how to write. The pregnancy was hard. I was sick constantly, and the silence made everything louder. I remember watching families in the park on Sundays from a distance. Fathers lifting daughters onto their shoulders. Mothers feeding babies from bottles. And I wondered what kind of mother I would have been if I had the choice. But I didn't. That choice was made the moment my mother sealed the envelope. I gave birth on a rainy Thursday in October. No one held my hand. No one brought flowers. I didn't scream. I remember being eerily quiet, the way a woman would be if she knew ahead of time that the baby wouldn't be hers to hold. She came out small, perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and tiny fists that opened and closed around air. They let me hold her once. I named her Ella, not officially, not on any papers. Just in my mind, in my heart. It was the name I had whispered to her through my skin for 9 months. When they took her away, I stared at the wall and didn't cry. Not then. I saved that for later. For years. I returned home the following spring. My mother picked me up from the bus stop. She didn't say a word during the drive. No, "How was it?" or "Are you okay?" Just silence and the hum of tires on asphalt. When we pulled into the driveway, my stepfather was mowing the lawn like nothing had happened, like I hadn't aged 100 years in 10 months, like I wasn't still bleeding. I walked upstairs to my old bedroom. Everything was exactly the same floral comforter, the same posters on the wall, the same perfume bottle I left behind. Like I had never left. Like I had never been pregnant. Like Ella had never existed. And that was the rule. We never spoke of it again. The following fall, I returned to college. Different school. Different major. I buried myself in literature, in poetry, in fiction, where people were allowed to cry and scream and be forgiven. I never saw Rachel again. I wondered what she had thought, if she had pieced it together. Turns out she had, but she never told a soul. Until now. Sitting at my kitchen table all these years later, I looked at that photo, the one with the baby in the yellow blanket, and I remembered everything, every ache, every silence. Every time I wanted to scream and instead folded into myself like paper. That child, she wasn't a secret. She was a part of me. And I had abandoned her. Yes, even if I was forced to, even if I didn't want to, even if I dreamed of her every year on her birthday, I had still let her go. The guilt of that. It doesn't fade. It settles into your bones. But now that DNA test had revealed what I never thought possible. She was looking for me. Ella was real, alive, a woman now, a person with questions I had no answers for. And she had reached out. Not with blame, just a message. I think we might be connected. I'm looking for someone who might be my birth mother. If you're not her, I'm sorry to bother you. But if you are, please write back. I stared at that message for hours, then days. My hands hovered over the keyboard more times than I can count. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. Because before I could tell her the truth, I had to face the man who took everything from me. His name was Leonard Harlow. To the outside world, he was respectable. A former Navy man turned insurance consultant. Steady, polished, polite at dinner parties. He had a tidy mustache and a deep voice that never rose above calm. But behind closed doors, Leonard was a shadow. And like all shadows, he crept in slowly until you didn't know where he began, and you ended. He became my stepfather when I was 13. My biological father had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. I don't remember much about that time except my mother crying behind closed doors and clutching wine glasses like they were lifeboats. Leonard came into our lives like a savior, that's how my mother introduced him. A real man, she said. Someone who knows how to take care of things. And at first he did. He fixed the leaky sink. He brought us flowers. He took us to dinner in places we'd never afford on our own. But over time, the warmth turned to watchfulness. He started correcting the way I spoke, the way I dressed, commenting on my friends, on how I walked, on how I grew up too fast. At 14, he started calling me little lady. At 15, he called me his special girl. At 16, he started locking the bathroom door from the inside when I showered. I didn't understand it then. Not fully. I just knew I stopped sleeping deeply. I double-locked my door. I wore baggy sweaters even in summer. When I turned 17, the gift started. A bracelet, a book of poetry, a letter tucked inside the spine of a novel telling me how beautifully thoughtful I was, how he wished I were older. And then one night when my mother was on a business trip, he kissed me on the mouth. It was like standing outside my body. I didn't move, didn't scream, didn't know how. He said, "It's okay. You're special." And I believed him, because I was young and desperate to feel wanted. And he knew that. He used it. Years later, I would learn the word grooming. But at 19, it just felt like confusion with no exit. I didn't love him, but I craved being seen. Being chosen. He would drive hours to visit me on campus, take me out for dinner, give me money under the table. It didn't feel good, but it felt inevitable. Until I got pregnant. That ended it. Not because he felt guilt, but because now I was a threat. When my mother found out, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse in horror like the mothers on TV. She went quiet, cold. And when I said it was him, she replied, "You'll keep your mouth shut." That was her answer. Not anger at him, but control over me. She made arrangements, paid the woman, bought the ticket. And when I returned home, Leonard was still there, mowing the lawn, pouring her wine, sleeping in her bed. He never looked me in the eye again. And I never spoke of it. Not to my friends, not to my husband, not to my son. Until now. The message from Ella remained unread for days. But the photo of her, which I found by accident through her public profile, was impossible to ignore. She had my eyes, my chin, his posture, and that hollow stillness I carried for years. She was real. She was waiting. But I couldn't write back until I confronted the person who had stolen everything from us. So I picked up the phone and called Shady Pines Assisted Living, the facility, where I knew Leonard had been placed 2 years ago. "Is Leonard Harlow accepting visitors?" I asked, my voice steady. The nurse on the line said yes. "But I should warn you. He doesn't remember much. Alzheimer's has taken most of his memory." I felt a strange mix of rage and relief. The man who remembered too much about my body now remembered nothing at all. "Tell him Marianne Harlow is coming tomorrow," I said. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, the lights dim, the curtains drawn, holding Ella's photo in one hand and Rachel's journal in the other. The box sat on the coffee table, open now, as if the past had spilled out and refused to go back in. David came downstairs sometime after midnight. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me on the couch. "I'm going to see him," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Do you want me to come?" I looked at him, this man who had stood beside me for 30 years, who had never known the child I lost, the man who made her the mother who buried it all. "No," I said gently. "I need to do this alone." He understood. We didn't need to speak much anymore. There's a kind of language you develop after decades of loving someone, a language of silences, shared breath, and the subtle tilt of a shoulder. And his shoulders were soft with support. The next morning, I put on a gray sweater, pulled my hair into a bun, and drove 45 minutes to Shady Pines. It was spring. The cherry blossoms were blooming along the edges of the road, delicate and unbothered by the weight I carried. Inside the facility, the air smelled like antiseptic and applesauce. I checked in at the front desk, signed the visitor log, and followed a nurse down a hall, lined with wheelchairs and faded watercolor paintings. She stopped at a door. "He's in there," she said. "He doesn't talk much, mostly stares." I nodded, then pushed the door open. He was smaller than I remembered. Gray stubble, thinner, fragile. A man folded in on himself, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, watching birds gather on the feeder. "Leonard," I said. No response. I stepped closer. "It's Marianne." He blinked slowly, his eyes tracking but distant. I sat across from him, the silence between us thicker than the air. For 10 minutes he said nothing. Then out of nowhere he murmured, "You were always quiet." I flinched. His voice was exactly the same, soft, dangerous, like a string pulled tight. "You hurt me," I said. He turned his head slowly. "You broke me." "Nothing. You made me feel like it was my fault." Still no response. I reached into my bag and pulled out Ella's photo. I held it in front of him. "This is your granddaughter," I whispered. "You'll never know her. But you did know her mother." He looked at the photo blankly. "Then, and this I will never forget." He smiled, not with recognition, but with pride. Something primal twisted in my chest. I stood. "You're not going to apologize," I said. "And maybe you can't. Maybe you don't remember what you did. But I remember everything." He blinked once. "You don't get to erase me. You don't get to win." And with that, I walked out. I didn't cry. Not until I got to the car. And then I screamed. For the 19-year-old girl who thought love meant silence. For the child I never held. For the woman I was still becoming. That night, after visiting Leonard, I didn't go home right away. I drove to the ocean. I needed something bigger than myself. Something that hadn't been poisoned by memory. The waves don't lie. They don't gaslight or erase you. They crash and retreat and crash again, and you always know exactly where you stand. I stood there on the shore until the sky darkened and the sand cooled beneath my shoes, and then I drove home in silence. When I got back, David was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea in front of him. He looked up when I entered, but didn't say a word. I walked past him, took the photo of Ella from the living room, and sat across from him at the table. "I need to write her back," I said. He nodded. I took a long breath and opened my laptop. Ella's message was still there, sitting like a landmine in my inbox. I think we might be connected. My fingers hovered over the keys. I wasn't sure where to start. How do you introduce yourself to the child you gave away? Hi, Ella. My name is Marianne. And yes, I am your birth mother. No, too formal. I've waited half my life to find the courage to write this message. Too theatrical. I sat back and let my hands drop. David said gently, "Tell the truth. The simplest version of it. She deserves that." He was right. So I wrote, "Hi, Ella. I got your message. I've read it many times and I've wanted to respond, but I wasn't sure how. Yes, I am your birth mother. I want to tell you everything. But first, I just want to say I'm so sorry. Not for loving you, I never stopped, but for not being strong enough to fight for you when I should have. You didn't do anything wrong. You were never a mistake. You were stolen from me before I had the chance to even become your mother. I know that might not make sense, but I hope one day I can explain it all. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet. You don't owe me anything, but I would love the chance to know you. With love, Marianne." I read it twice, then hit send, and immediately broke down. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart slammed against my ribs. And every time it wasn't her, I felt a hollow disappointment settle in again. Until finally her reply came. "Hi, Marianne. Thank you for writing. I've waited a long time to hear those words even though I wasn't sure they'd ever come. I don't really know how I feel. Angry, curious, scared, hopeful. All of it, maybe. I'm open to meeting. I'd like to hear your story. And I'd like you to hear mine too. Would this weekend work? There's a small cafe near the pier. It's quiet." Ella. I read it 3 times before I let myself breathe. David hugged me from behind as I stood frozen still staring at her words. "She wants to meet," I whispered. "I'm proud of you," he said. But I wasn't proud of myself yet. Not until I could look her in the eye. Saturday came too fast. I wore simple clothes, a soft blue blouse, minimal makeup. I didn't want to present a version of myself. I wanted to show up as I was a mother in pieces. The cafe was small and sunlit with hanging plants and wooden tables. I arrived early and sat by the window facing the entrance. My hands were trembling, so I gripped my tea like it might anchor me. Then she walked in. I knew her instantly. Not because I recognized her, I didn't. Not fully. But because something in my body shifted like a key turning in an old lock. She looked like me, a version of me with clearer eyes and a stronger spine. She walked over slowly, unsure. "Ella," I said, standing. She nodded. I didn't hug her. I wanted to, but I waited. She sat down. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. And then she said, "Why didn't you come for me?" Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't crying. She asked it like someone who had rehearsed it for years. I swallowed hard. "My mother," I began, then stopped. I wouldn't blame everything on her. The truth is, I was young, and I was scared. And I was told that keeping you would ruin everything. She tilted her head. "So you let them ruin me instead." I flinched. "I didn't know where you were," I said. "It was a private adoption. I wasn't allowed any information. I was told it was better that way. Clean. Final." She looked down at her hands. "I always wondered," she said. "Every birthday, every time someone asked about my real mom, I imagined you were dead, or that you didn't want me. I wanted you," I said, my voice breaking. "God, I wanted you. I still do." We sat in silence for a while. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. "I found this when my adoptive mother passed," she said. It was hidden in her dresser. Inside was a letter unsigned, but I recognized the handwriting. My mother's. She doesn't know. The girl is too naive. I took care of it the right way. No papers, no trail. Just cash. The family is clean. Connected. She'll never come back to haunt us. My stomach dropped. "No papers, no trail," I whispered. "It wasn't even legal." Ella shook her head. "My adoptive father was in politics. They could cover things." "She sold you." "Yeah," she said softly. "I was something to be handled. I closed my eyes. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just silence that shaped my life. It was theft. Of choice, of truth, of blood, of her. I don't know if I can forgive you, Ella said, standing slowly. I'm not asking you to, I replied. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. She nodded. Then, and I didn't expect it, she placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Let's take this slow. And then she walked out, leaving the door cracked just enough for hope to slip through. She said, let's take this slow. And I clung to those 5 words like a prayer. I didn't expect a second meeting. I didn't expect kindness. I didn't even expect a reply. But she left the door cracked open, and that was more than I thought I deserved. That same night, I sat down with a blank journal. Not the kind I used in college, frantic, messy, tear-stained. This one was simple, clean. A gift from David given years ago, still wrapped in brown paper and string. I opened to the first page and wrote one sentence. This is everything I was too afraid to tell you. And then I kept going. Every night I added more. The truth, not the version scrubbed for survival, but the raw edges, how it felt to carry her, to lose her, to live for decades pretending I hadn't. It became my new ritual. And even if she never asked for it, I would give it to her one day, proof that I never forgot. 3 weeks passed before she reached out again. A simple message. Do you like pho? I smiled at the screen like a teenager asked to prom. My fingers shook as I typed back, yes. There's a good spot downtown. 6 p.m. That dinner changed everything. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a movie scene where we cried and hugged. It was awkward. Ella sat across from me, scrolling the menu like she was scanning for something other than food, maybe searching for the version of herself that might have existed if things had been different. I watched her hands, small with rings on 2 fingers. No wedding band. No tattoos. She bit the inside of her cheek when she was thinking. Just like I used to. We talked about surface things first. She was 37, worked in nonprofit legal advocacy, no kids, liked gardening but killed most of her plants, had a cat named Lou. She asked about Theo, my son. I told her he was 30, finishing school, passionate about public health, kind, quiet. Does he know about me, she asked. I shook my head. I wanted to tell him. I just didn't know how. You should, she said. He deserves the truth too. She was right, again. I stared at her bowl, steam rising like a question neither of us could answer. Then I said it. I thought about you every year. On your birthday. I even baked a cake one year. Just for me. Lit a candle. She looked up. Her eyes were glistening. But she didn't cry. I did that too, she said. Only I was blowing out candles for a mother I didn't know. The next day I told Theo. I didn't give him a slow build-up. I sat him down in our living room when he came home to visit and said, "You have a sister." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I told him everything. The pregnancy, the adoption, Leonard, my mother. By the time I finished, he was pale and silent. Then he said softly, "Did Dad know?" I nodded. "And you never told me?" I was ashamed, I said, and scared. But now I know silence only makes the wound deeper. He stood and walked out of the room. I didn't chase him. That night he texted me from upstairs. Her name is Ella. I'd like to meet her sometime, when she's ready. And just like that, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 37 years. Ella and I began meeting every Sunday. Sometimes it was for coffee, sometimes for walks in the park. Sometimes just sitting in silence on a bench watching strangers pass. She wasn't warm, not yet, but she was present, and I could live with that. One afternoon, we sat on a hill near the botanical gardens sharing a box of strawberries. She asked suddenly, "Do you ever wonder who I would have been if you'd kept me?" I swallowed. "Every day." She looked down at the grass. "I used to pretend you were a painter, or a musician, someone mysterious and artistic." "I was a teacher," I said. "High school English. Nothing mysterious about it." "That's still something?" I smiled. "My students would argue otherwise." Then she pulled something from her bag. A folder. "I requested my adoption file," she said. "They only gave me parts of it, most of it was sealed. But I found something strange." She handed me a photocopied document. The names of the adoptive parents were redacted. But there at the bottom was a signature, Miriam Harlow. My mother. Not me. She forged it, I whispered. Ella nodded. She signed the consent form. Not you. The world tilted. She had no legal authority. She made herself the mother on record, claimed you were unstable, said she was acting in your best interest. I pressed my fingers to my lips. She stole you from me twice. Yes. Ella paused. Does it matter to you that she did that? It matters, I said. Because it proves what I always felt, that I never gave you up. She took you. Ella studied me. Then finally she said, okay, that helps. And for the first time she smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one. That night I went home and opened the journal I had been keeping. I wrote the last line on the final page. You were never a mistake. You were my voice in a world that forced me to whisper. And now I'm done whispering. Then I wrapped the journal in soft blue cloth and placed it in a small wooden box. I would give it to her soon, but not yet. Not until I was sure we were both ready to hold the weight of it not as shame, but as truth. Together. Ella's smile stayed with me for days. It was small, tentative, but it was the first time I saw her drop the armor. For a moment, it wasn't just mother and daughter trying to mend decades of silence. It was two women choosing to see one another through the ruins. And then, just as we were settling into something resembling fragile peace, the past twisted again. It started with a phone call from my sister Nora. We hadn't spoken much in the last few years, a soft estrangement born of old wounds and different versions of our shared childhood. She said, I heard you've been meeting someone named Ella. My heart stopped. How do you know that? I asked quietly. There was a pause on the line. She found me, Nora said. Messaged me through one of those ancestry sites. Said she thought I might be her aunt. I didn't believe it at first. And now, I've seen her face, she said softly. There's no denying it. I waited tense. She wants to know more, Nora added. About your mother. About Leonard. About everything. I exhaled. Then tell her, I said. She has a right to know. Nora hesitated. There's something else. Something I never told you. About Mom. About that year you were gone. My pulse began to rise. What are you talking about? Come over, she said. I'll show you. That night, I drove across town to Nora's house, a tidy brick bungalow she shared with her husband and two golden retrievers. It looked nothing like the house we'd grown up in, and that in itself was comforting. She met me at the door with a strange expression somewhere between concern and guilt. We sat in her kitchen and she pulled out a worn leather folder. I found this in Mom's attic after she died, she said. I didn't know what to do with it. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I should show you, but now that Ella's asking questions, I think it's time. Inside were typed letters, receipts, a small calendar with dates circled in red, and at the bottom a sealed envelope. I picked it up. On the front in my mother's tidy script it read, For Miriam's eyes only. Nora nodded. That was our mother's legal name. She never let people use it, she hated it. But she used it when she wanted to hide things, including the adoption. I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized document. My heart nearly stopped. It was a declaration of mental instability signed by my mother and countersigned by Leonard Harlow. It claimed I was psychologically unfit to raise a child due to emotional delusions and inappropriate attachment behaviors. I looked at the date, October 2nd, 1987, 2 days before Ella was born. That's how she got the adoption through without your signature, Nora said. She claimed you were unwell. She had Leonard testify. She made herself the legal guardian on paper. I stared at it in disbelief. She institutionalized me, on paper, without ever putting me in a hospital. Yes, my hands were shaking. I wasn't just silenced, I was erased. Nora looked down. I think she believed she was protecting the family's reputation. She was obsessed with control. I folded the papers slowly. No, she wasn't protecting anything. She was preserving herself and the man who hurt me. I drove home in silence. When I stepped into the house, David was waiting for me in the living room. I sat beside him and handed him the document. He read it slowly, jaw tightening. She forged a psychiatric claim to steal your child, he said. She did worse, I said. She made the world believe I never existed as a mother. She rewrote my life. He looked at me, eyes glassy. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell Ella everything I said, even the parts I'm ashamed of. And then I'm going to burn every last piece of my mother's poison. We met the next morning at a quiet walking trail along the river. Ella wore sunglasses and a simple gray hoodie. I carried a manila folder tucked beneath my arm. We walked side by side for a while before I said, I brought you something. She stopped walking. I handed her the folder. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the pages. I watched the expressions shift: confusion, then understanding, then disgust. She lied about your adoption, I said. She lied about me. She lied about everything. Ella said nothing for a long time. Then she said, did you know? No, I said. Not until this week. I knew she sent me away. I knew she arranged everything. But I didn't know the depth of what she did. I didn't know she declared me unfit. That she used Leonard to validate it. That she turned me into a ghost. Ella's voice was flat. She did the same to me. We kept walking. The river flowed beside us, cold and fast. Finally, she said, you didn't fail me, Marianne. She did. I blinked hard. Then she added, but I need to ask you something else. Anything. Why didn't you ever go to the police? About Leonard? That question struck like a blade. I didn't think anyone would believe me, I said honestly. Not back then. Not when my own mother told me it was my fault. Ella nodded. I did, she said. What? I filed a statement, she said. Last year when I found out I was adopted. Before I even knew who you were. I needed the truth on record, in case he ever did it to someone else. I looked at her, my daughter, fierce, braver than I had ever been, and suddenly I realized maybe I hadn't failed her entirely. Because here she was carrying the torch I couldn't. That night, I took every document with my mother's handwriting, the fake psychiatric reports, the forged consent forms, even the letters she'd written to Leonard, and placed them in our fireplace. David sat beside me, and when I lit the match, it wasn't anger I felt. It was release. The flames curled up around the lies, eating them whole. And in their place, something new began to form. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the space where healing might grow. It was Ella's idea to go to the courthouse. Not out of vengeance, though I could feel it simmering beneath her stillness, but for the record. I want it documented, she said. I want my name corrected, my origin acknowledged. I want the truth to exist somewhere, official. I admired her clarity, her steel. We stood in line outside the family records office on a warm Tuesday morning. She wore a navy blazer, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. I wore a beige cardigan, clutching a folder of documents in trembling hands. My journal copies of the forged adoption, the psychiatric lie, and a letter I'd written to the judge. We were ushered into a small windowless hearing room with beige walls and a dull carpet. A clerk, young and wide-eyed, sat across from us behind a plastic screen. Ella was calm. I was not. She said, we're here to petition for correction of historical adoption records under the new restorative justice provision. The clerk blinked, then nodded slowly. Do you have supporting documents? Ella glanced at me. I slid the folder across the table. It felt surreal, presenting the theft of a child like a legal transaction. The clerk skimmed the paperwork in silence. I watched her eyebrows tighten as she read the section about the forged psychiatric evaluation. When she looked up, her voice was softer. I'll escalate this to a family court liaison, she said. There may be a hearing scheduled within 30 days. Ella nodded. Thank you. We left the building without speaking. Only when we reached the parking lot did I exhale. I feel like I'm walking through mud, I said. Like I'm finally moving, but every step is heavy. She looked at me. You are moving, though. I gave her a tired smile. I'm following you. 2 days later, Ella emailed me a scanned letter. It was addressed to the state board that oversaw private adoptions in the 80s. She had filed a formal complaint. At the end of the email, she'd written, I don't care if anyone gets arrested. I just want the paper trail burned into history. I want people to know what women like us survived. Women like us. I read those 3 words again and again. And for the first time since she'd found me, I allowed myself to think of her as mine. A week passed. Then two. Ella and I met again for dinner, this time at my house. She brought wine, I made pasta. David joined us. Theo too. It was awkward but warm. Theo asked questions carefully. He was gentle with her, protective of me. He'd always had that old soul empathy, the kind that made him seem far older than his years. Ella told them about her work, her clients, the long hours. But the most surprising moment came when David turned to her and said, "Do you have any childhood memories you hold on to, even good ones?" Ella took a long sip of her wine. Then she said, "There was a woman who used to volunteer at my elementary school. She'd read books to us in the library. She wore these big earrings and smelled like cinnamon." I smiled. I was that woman once. She glanced at me. "I know. You do." I looked through every public record I could find after that DNA match came in. I found photos of you volunteering, teaching. I just didn't know how to face you. I blinked back tears. "I was always hoping you'd come looking." She nodded. "And you were always hoping I wouldn't hate you." Something like that. She laughed softly. And in that laugh, I heard something I hadn't heard since the day she was born, a note of belonging. Later that night, after everyone had left, I opened the wooden box I'd been saving. Inside was the journal I'd written since she came back into my life. I wrapped it in ribbon and placed it in a padded envelope, addressed simply to Ella Harper. Underneath, I wrote, "When you're ready." A few days later, the letter from the court arrived. There would be a hearing. Not to punish anyone, both Leonard and my mother were legally beyond reach, but to determine whether the record of Ella's adoption could be formally amended to reflect the truth. Ella called me right away. "You'll testify with me?" she asked. "I will," I said. And I meant it. Not just for her, but for me. The morning of the hearing, I wore navy, the same color as the sweater I'd been wearing the day I left the hospital without her. I hadn't thought about that sweater in years, but it surfaced in my mind like a ghost returning for closure. The courtroom was nearly empty. A judge sat at the front, flanked by two clerks. Ella stood tall as she delivered her statement, factual, composed, steady. She read from the forged document. She presented her DNA report. She even read the line from my mother's handwritten letter, "She'll never come back to haunt us." Then it was my turn. I stood, hands shaking, and began to read the letter I'd prepared. I was 19 when my daughter was stolen from me. Not by strangers, not by the system, but by the people who should have protected us both. For years, I lived with the belief that I had failed her, that I hadn't fought hard enough, that I had been complicit in her disappearance. But the truth is, I never gave her up. I was silenced, threatened, and erased. The courtroom was silent. I looked at Ella. Her eyes were glistening. "She is not a mistake. She is not a shadow. She is my daughter, and I am her mother. The record should reflect that." The judge looked over her glasses, and then she said, "Your petition will be granted. The record will be amended." That was it. Just a sentence. But it cracked something open inside me. The official truth, the real truth, would now live on paper. And that meant no one could take it from us again. As we walked out into the sunlit corridor, Ella turned to me and said, "That's one fire put out." I smiled. "Only one." She nodded. "But it's a start." Then she pulled me into a quiet hug. And I didn't let go for a very long time. Healing isn't linear. People say that all the time, but living it is a messier business than anyone admits. One day you feel light enough to breathe, and the next you're standing in your kitchen gripping a glass of water like it's the only thing keeping you tethered to the earth. After the court hearing, things between Ella and me moved cautiously forward. We didn't become a storybook reunion. No overnight. Mom and daughter titles. No photo albums spread on the living room rug. But we did become real. And that to me was more sacred than any fiction. We called twice a week. Shared recipes. Sent each other photos of quiet, insignificant moments, her cat curled in a sunbeam, the bread I had baked that collapsed at the center, Theo's graduation robe spread on the couch. But healing has layers. and sometimes the deepest one doesn't show itself until something pulls it loose. That something came in the form of an email. Subject line, I think we might be related half-siblings. Theo forwarded it to me with a short message. What should I do? I froze. Then clicked. The email had been sent through the same ancestry database Ella had used. The woman writing it claimed to be the daughter of Leonard Harlow, born 2 years before me. A child he'd apparently fathered before marrying my mother with a woman he never spoke of. She had done a full DNA panel. Theo matched as a half-sibling. My blood ran cold. Ella and Theo were not just half-siblings through me. They were both children of Leonard Harlow, and that made them half-siblings through him too. I sat down hard, the room spinning. How could I tell them? How could I tell my son that the man who hurt me had also fathered him? I drove to Theo's apartment that evening. He lived in a modest loft near the university plants on the windowsill, books stacked on every surface. He opened the door in sweatpants and socks. I figured you'd come, he said gently. We sat down. I held the printout of the email in my hand but couldn't bring myself to unfold it. I didn't know, I whispered. About him. About this. He nodded. I believe you. But if it's true... I swallowed hard. Leonard is your biological father. I guessed, he said. The timing, the absence, the weird silence around that whole period. I looked at him, tears rising. I'm so sorry. He reached over and put his hand on mine. You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. But still I felt tainted. As though my son had been pulled into the web of Leonard's control even without ever meeting him. I want to meet Ella, Theo said. Really meet her. Now that we know. I blinked. You're not angry? I'm angry at him, Theo said. But not at you. And not at her. She's my sister twice over. Maybe that just means we're supposed to be connected. We arranged to meet at a quiet diner halfway between our cities. Ella was already seated when Theo and I arrived. She wore a denim jacket and no makeup. Her expression unreadable. She stood when she saw us. No words. Just a long look between the two of them. Then Theo said, Hi. I'm your half-brother. ×2. Ella's lips twitched. Then unexpectedly she laughed. It was soft-tired but genuine. Guess we don't get to be normal, she said. Normal's overrated, he replied. They sat across from one another and I watched them, same posture, same polite smile, same way of tapping a finger when they were thinking. I hadn't realized how much of Leonard lived in them, both in tiny gestures, in bone structure, in genes that carried stories they never asked to inherit. But unlike Leonard, they chose compassion. Ella said, I want to be clear about something. What he did to you, what he took from you, I don't forgive that. Ever. Theo nodded. Me neither. And just like that, they formed a quiet alliance, not just in blood, but in resistance. A choice not to repeat the silence of the past. That night, Ella called me. Her voice was softer than usual. Are you okay? I asked. I don't know, she said. I've been thinking about how many people shaped my life without my permission. Your mother. Him. Even the people who raised me. And now, I'm trying to reclaim it. All of it. But it's exhausting. I know, I said. You're doing it, though. She paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you were pregnant with me, did you ever talk to me? Like I was there. I blinked, startled by the question. Then slowly I smiled. Every night, I said. I'd lie in bed and put my hands over my stomach and whisper things. Poems, questions, dreams. I didn't know if you could hear, but I hoped you could feel it. What did you say? I thought for a moment. I told you that you were mine, that you were strong, that you'd be smarter than me, braver, that even if I couldn't keep you, you'd change the world. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Ella said, Maybe you were right. The next morning, I mailed the journal, the one I'd been writing for months. I didn't add a note. Just wrapped it, gently placed it in a padded envelope, and sent it. It arrived 2 days later. Ella texted me, I'll read it, in pieces. That's all she said. That's all I needed. Later that week, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom and stared at my own reflection. Really stared. At the lines beneath my eyes, the white growing in my hair, the tired curve of my shoulders. I didn't look like the girl I once was. I didn't even look like the woman who had hidden this truth for 30 years. But I looked like someone real, someone claimed. And for the first time in a long time, I liked who I saw. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ella called. Her voice was tight-clipped at the edges. "I found something," she said. I paused. "What kind of something?" "A letter. It was with his things." My breath caught. His. Leonard's. From the facility. They gave me his personal effects. Most of it was junk. A broken watch. Some old mail. But there was a sealed envelope addressed to you. In his handwriting. I went cold. He wrote to me. She hesitated. "You want me to bring it over?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Read it to me." Silence. Then a quiet exhale on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her shifting the pages. Then she began to read. "Marianne, if you're reading this, it means someone thought it mattered. That I had anything left to say worth putting on paper. I don't remember much anymore. They say I'm sick. That I forget. But there are some things I remember clearly. Things I see every time I close my eyes. You. Your face that night in the hallway. Your hands shaking. The sound of your breath. I've spent years wondering whether you ever forgave me, or if you hated me, or if I ruined you. Maybe all three. I don't have excuses, I only have truth. You weren't the only one. There were others. Before you. After you. But you were the one I loved. I know how that sounds. Maybe it's disgusting. Maybe it's a lie I told myself to sleep at night. But it's real to me. What we had. The way you looked at me. The way you made me feel young again. I know I hurt you. I've seen your pain in the mirror for decades. But part of me still wonders if we'd lived in a different time, in a different world. Would it have been different? Would you have stayed? Would you have chosen me? I'll go to my grave not knowing. And maybe that's the only punishment I've earned. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted to say it. I wanted you to know. You mattered to me, Elle. When Ella finished, there was nothing but silence on the line. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed like a fist. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. I couldn't answer. Because something in me had shattered. And not for him, but for the girl I had once been. The girl who thought what she felt for him was something resembling love. The girl who mistook manipulation for intimacy. Who never understood the depth of the violation because it came wrapped in words like special and chosen. I finally found my voice. "He never loved me," I said. "He loved the control." Ella said softly, "I know." I sank into the couch, the weight of his words pressing into my chest like stones. "I can't burn that letter," I said. "No," Ella agreed. "We need to keep it. Not to honor him, but to remember. To document it," I said. "Exactly." We were quiet again. Then I whispered he knew what he did. Of course he did. That night, I dreamed of my 19-year-old self. She was standing barefoot in the hallway of my childhood home, wearing an oversized nightgown, her hands trembling. Leonard stood behind her, shadowed, reaching forward with a kindness that wasn't real. And then suddenly Ella was there. She stepped between us. And she took my younger self by the hand. She didn't say anything. She just led her out of the house, out of the darkness, into light. The next morning, I placed a single photograph in a frame. It was the only picture I had of Ella as a baby. The one from the envelope I found in the attic, wrapped in yellow, her eyes closed, mouth slightly open. Next to it, I placed a recent photo she'd sent her in her garden, holding a tomato, laughing Lou the cat lounging at her feet. Two versions of her side by side, the one I lost, and the one I found again. I stared at them for a long time, then whispered, "I'm sorry I let him take so much from you." But the woman in the garden photo, she didn't look broken. She looked like someone who had chosen herself. And maybe, just maybe, that meant she'd chosen me too. Later that week, Theo came over. He held up a tattered book. "Is this yours?" I squinted. "My old copy of Jane Eyre." He smiled. "Found it in your attic. Notes in the margins. Some heavy underlining." I laughed. I was very intense at 19. He sat beside me on the couch. "You were strong." I looked at him. I wasn't. You survived. You loved. You raised me. You're still here. That's strength. I blinked back tears. Then he said, I've been talking to Ella more. My heart lifted. She's kind of weird, he added. In a good way. She makes me think about things differently. I smiled. She always did. He paused. I'm glad she's here. Me too, I said. More than I could ever say aloud. At night, I light a candle by the framed photos. Not in mourning, in reverence, for what was lost, and for what miraculously returned. Ella called just after sunset. Her voice was steady, but I sensed something under it the same way you can feel a storm in the air before the first drop falls. I've been thinking, she said, about moving. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Moving. Yes. Away. Somewhere quieter. I've been offered a job upstate. It's more administrative, less courtroom grind, slower pace, more trees, less ghosts. I felt the breath slip from my chest. That's a big change. I know. I traced the rim of my coffee cup. Do you want to go? There was a pause. I think I need to, she said. Not forever, but for now. I need to know who I am when I'm not holding the weight of what happened here. I need to find out what it means to be me, not just someone who was given away then found. I understood, but it still stung. I thought maybe we were just beginning, I said quietly. We are, she replied. But beginnings don't always happen in one place. Sometimes they need space. I closed my eyes, willing myself not to cry. Will you keep in touch? Yes, and I want to come back, but on my terms. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I'll help you pack, I offered. Okay, she said. I'd like that. The next week, I found myself standing in her apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes and half-empty shelves. It was surreal to be helping a daughter move away whom I'd only just started to know. I folded sweaters. She sorted through files. We spoke about small things, recipes, weather books. But beneath it all was the quiet throb of everything we weren't saying. Then, as I wrapped a delicate porcelain teacup in newspaper, she said, Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me? I looked up. When we met, she nodded. You said you don't owe me anything, but I'd love the chance to know you. I smiled sadly. I meant it. Well, she said, I think I do owe you something. My breath caught. You gave me life, she continued. And yes, others raised me, but they never told me the truth. You did. And that matters. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. She stepped toward me, placed the teacup in the box, and added, You'll always be my mother, Marianne, even if I don't always know how to show it. I closed the box, gently sealing it shut. Then we're doing okay, I whispered. On moving day, Theo came to help. He and Ella shared quiet jokes and loaded furniture like they'd done it a dozen times. Watching them was bittersweet, like seeing a life that could have existed if things had gone differently. If I'd been allowed to raise her. If Theo had grown up with a sister. But maybe this was their version of childhood built in adulthood, brick by brick. When the last box was in the trunk, Ella turned to me. Can I give you something? I nodded. She pulled out an envelope and pressed it into my hand. Read it after I've gone. Then she hugged me. Tight, longer than usual. I held on. And when she let go, I knew it wasn't goodbye. Not really. That night, I sat alone on the porch. The stars were out. The breeze was gentle. I opened the envelope. Inside was a card, simple, no frills. On the front it read, For the woman who gave me both life and truth. Inside, her handwriting curved carefully across the page. I used to wonder who you were. Now I wonder how I ever lived without knowing. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what we lost, but I do know this. I don't want to lose anymore. Thank you for not giving up. Not when it was easy to stay silent. Not when the world told you to forget. I won't forget. Love, Ella. My fingers trembled. The tears came slowly, not painful, but clean. Like rain after a long drought, I folded the card and placed it beside her photos. The baby, the woman, and now, the letter. All of her, all of me. Side by side. Later, I spoke to David in bed. She's gone, I said. She's not, he replied. She's just becoming. I turned to face him. Do you think it's too late for us? His brow furrowed. Us. I nodded. After everything. The secrets. The distance. He reached for my hand under the covers. We're still here, he said. That's what matters. And in the quiet, I believed him. The next morning, I woke early. I brewed coffee, fed the birds, sat at the table and opened a fresh journal. On the first page, I wrote, "This is for Ella." The next chapter. The one where she finds herself and where I learn how to love her from afar without fear. Then I wrote the second line. This time, no more silence. The letter arrived on a Monday, pale beige envelope. No return address, my name printed in black ink across the front. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but something about the thickness of the paper made me pause. The weight of it. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Simple, precise. Dear Mrs. Marianne Harlow, this letter is to inform you that you are listed as a beneficiary in the estate of the late Miriam Harlow. Please contact our office to arrange a meeting and the release of the contents held in your mother's personal safe deposit box. Sincerely, Troman & Clark LLP. I sat back stunned. I had assumed everything of hers was already claimed, divided, burned, or buried, much like the woman herself. After the funeral, Nora and I had sorted through the house, the jewelry, the dusty storage. There had been no mention of a safety deposit box. I called Nora that evening. Did you know about this? I asked. She sighed. No, but with Mom, I'm not surprised. The appointment was set for 2 days later. I didn't sleep much in between. My mind kept turning. What had she hidden? What last manipulation? What final string? And why now, after everything? The bank was cold and quiet. I sat across from a lawyer in a navy suit, his expression unreadable. He slid a small metal box across the table. I'll give you privacy, he said. Take your time. I stared at it for a moment before opening the latch. Inside, 2 things. A handwritten letter and a small velvet pouch. My hands trembled as I reached for the letter first. My mother's handwriting, tight and neat, controlled even from beyond the grave. Marianne, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I suppose you'll feel relief? Maybe even satisfaction. You always were so dramatic about your pain. But I know you. I know that beneath your stubbornness is the same fire that drove me. And it's time you learn the truth. You are not the child I planned. I had you after an affair, not with your father, not with Leonard. With someone else. Someone I could never be with. I married Leonard to fix the mistake. To erase the scandal. He never knew. Neither did you. But that's why I never connected to you the way a mother should. I couldn't bear the reminder. I thought Leonard would tame you, shape you. He was a man of control. I didn't know. I didn't know he would turn that control on you. I'm sorry for that. In my own way. But you must understand, we all survive how we can. I did what I thought was necessary. The pouch contains a necklace. It was the only thing he ever gave me. I kept it for reasons I can't fully explain. Maybe because part of me never stopped loving him. Maybe because part of me hoped you'd carry that piece forward, the better part. You always thought I was cold. Maybe I was. But I loved you the only way I knew how, by keeping you strong. Do with this what you will. Mother. I stared at the letter for a long time, then opened the pouch. Inside was a delicate gold chain at the end of which hung a small pendant, a half-moon carved from rose quartz. I recognized it instantly. She used to wear it when I was a child. I remembered reaching for it once when she was holding me and how she pulled away. It hadn't been just a necklace. It had been a memory, a wall, a secret I had never been allowed to touch. And now it sat in my palm harmless. I drove home in silence, the letter folded in my coat pocket, the pendant resting on the seat beside me. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat at my desk, and began to write Ella another letter, not like the journal, not like the emails. This one was short, focused, final. Ella. I thought I knew where I came from. I didn't. The woman who raised me was never a mother, not in the way I tried to be for you. But she left me a truth I wasn't expecting. I am not Leonard's biological daughter, which means you and I are only connected through me, not through him. You are not his. You never were. Maybe that changes something. Maybe it doesn't. But I needed you to know. And I need you to hear this too. You are the only part of my past I don't regret. I hope in time that can be enough. Love, M. I didn't send it yet. But I placed it gently in the drawer beside her earlier card. A circle closed. A truth corrected. The next morning, I visited the small local cemetery where my mother had been buried. I hadn't gone back since the funeral. I didn't bring flowers. Just the pendant. I stood over her grave and said, I know you tried to shape me into your likeness. I dropped the pendant at the foot of her headstone, but I chose to become myself. Then I walked away. And this time, I didn't look back. I didn't know how she'd react. It was one thing to face the past together. But this new truth was something different. It untethered the story we'd both been learning to live with. It changed the math of what we were. I sat on the back porch that evening, her letter sealed and resting in my lap. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. A breeze brushed my skin like a whisper, and I remembered rocking her in my arms on that rainy October morning for those few brief minutes before they took her away. What had I whispered to her? Something like, I'm yours. Now I was about to tell her that what tethered us was not DNA, not biology, not the man who had taken everything from both of us, but choice. Would she still choose me? I mailed the letter the next morning. 2 days later, she called. No hello, no greeting. Just, so we're not related by blood. I took a breath. No, not through Leonard. A pause. Then, but I still am your daughter. I blinked. You are. And you're still my mother. Tears flooded my eyes instantly. Yes, I whispered. That doesn't change. She sighed like she'd been holding something inside for too long. I thought I'd feel lost all over again, she said. But honestly, I feel clean, like something's been scraped off me. I laughed gently through my tears. He's not yours. No, she said. He never was. And knowing that, it feels like taking a brick out of my chest. I held the phone to my heart. Thank you for telling me, she added. I was scared too. Well, she said, voice softening. You're not the only one learning how to tell the truth. A week passed. Then another. She didn't move away after all. Not yet. The new job remained in limbo, unconfirmed. Maybe I'll go later, she told me. But for now, I kind of like being here. She came over one Sunday afternoon. No agenda. No unpacking boxes. Just her Theo David and me. The four of us sat around the table eating peach cobbler, laughing about something absurd Theo had said, and I realized this was the family I had never dared to dream of. Not perfect, but present. Ella stayed after the others left. We sat on the couch, a blanket across our knees, and she turned to me. Do you remember her voice? My mother's. No, she said. The woman who raised me. I paused. A little. She used to hum when she cleaned. Not music. Just something soft. I thought she hated me when I was little. But sometimes when I'd fake being asleep, she'd sit on the edge of my bed and smooth my hair. She never said I love you. Not once. But that humming, I think it was the only way she knew how. I nodded. It's strange, isn't it? How silence becomes love in some families, and a weapon in others. She looked at me. You're not silent anymore. Neither are you. She smiled. You know, I think I needed that letter more than I realized. The one from me. No, she said. The one from your mother. The one that told you the truth. I stiffened. You read it. You left it on the table last week. I saw it. I didn't mean to snoop, but I read fast. I laughed, shaking my head. Of course you do. She tilted her head. You know what I liked best. What? That she said you had fire. I looked at her, surprised. She said it like a warning, Ella continued. But I heard it like a gift. I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Later that evening, she helped me carry laundry upstairs. We passed by the attic door, now permanently unlatched. She paused. That's where you found the photo, right? I nodded. And the journal. The beginning of everything. She reached out and touched the frame of the attic door as though feeling for an echo. Then she said, let's go up. The air was thick with heat and dust, but the space had changed. It wasn't the graveyard of secrets anymore. It was just a room. Ordinary. Ella walked to the far corner and sat down cross-legged, staring at the wooden beams above her. I sat beside her. After a while, she said, "When I was little, I used to dream of a woman who looked like me standing in a field of yellow flowers." I looked at her. She'd reach out, but I could never touch her. I'd wake up crying, feeling like I had lost something I hadn't even known I needed. I swallowed. And now she has a name and hands that hold mine. We stayed in the attic until night fell, talking, laughing, sitting in silence. And in that quiet space, surrounded by all the things once too painful to face, we stitched something real. Not with blood, not with proof, but with presence. And sometimes that's the only kind of truth that matters. I had been keeping the box hidden for years. Not the one from the attic, not the envelope from my mother's estate. This one was smaller. Hand-carved cedar wood lined in velvet. I'd kept it locked away in the back of my closet behind old scarves and sweaters I never wore. I wasn't ready to open it, not until Ella was. And I knew after the attic, after the silence, after the letter, she was. So one morning I set it on the dining room table. When Ella arrived for coffee, still half-sleepy hair in a bun, holding a bag of fresh bagels, I motioned toward the box. She paused. "What's this?" "Something I've carried with me for a long time," I said. "And something I think you're ready for." She sat down slowly. Her hands hovered over the lid. "You sure?" I nodded. She opened it gently. Inside was a folded hospital bracelet, a dried yellow flower wrapped in tissue, a scrap of pink flannel with a faded pattern of tiny ducks, the blanket they wrapped her in after birth, and finally the small, wrinkled note I had scribbled to the nurse who promised to deliver it to Ella's adoptive parents. "Her name is Ella. Please tell her someday that I loved her." She lifted the note slowly. "Read it twice." Then tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "You kept this all these years?" She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "I've never had anything from before I was 3. No photos, no clothes, not even a lock of hair. Nothing that said I was wanted before I arrived in someone else's arms." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You were always wanted, always." She reached into the box and lifted the tiny flannel scrap to her cheek. "I imagined this blanket," she said softly. "I used to make one up in my dreams. Always pink, always warm." I reached across the table, my hand resting lightly on hers. "I was afraid if I gave it to you too soon it would feel like pressure or pain. But now, it feels like a gift." "It is a gift," she said. She touched each item again, carefully, reverently. Then she closed the lid. "I'll keep it close," she whispered. "Forever." Later that afternoon, we took a walk through the park. The air was cool, the leaves just beginning to turn. She linked her arm through mine without speaking, and we wandered slowly past families, joggers, people reading on benches. There was a woman nearby with a baby in a stroller, bouncing the child gently while humming a tune under her breath. Ella watched her for a while. "I used to hate the sight of that," she said. "Mothers with babies. It made me feel like I missed a world I was supposed to belong to." I waited. "But now," she added, "I see them, and I think maybe that's still ahead of me, in some way." I turned to her. "You've made a whole life for yourself, with or without me. But you let me back in. That's something most people don't have the courage to do." She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "You gave me the truth, even when it hurt. That's more than most people get." I nodded. We sat on a bench and watched the water ripple in the pond. A mother duck guided her ducklings along the edge. The kind of serene, simple moment I never would have noticed in the decades I spent carrying silence like armor. Ella turned to me and said, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" "Yes," I said, "but not anymore." She smiled faintly. "Me neither." We sat there for a long time, not needing to fill the space between us. Because now the silence no longer meant absence. It meant peace. That night, I opened my own journal, the one I hadn't written in since the night she didn't leave town. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "Some things we lose forever. But some things we are lucky enough to meet again, not as ghosts, but as people with names, with faces, with hands that reach back. She is not a memory, she is my daughter. And I am finally her mother. We didn't plan to go there. The hospital had always been a phantom in my life, a place I remembered not for its walls or halls, but for the loss that had begun inside them. It had changed names over the years, undergone renovations, rebranded itself as a community medical center with sleek signage and a coffee kiosk near the entrance. But when Ella suggested we go, I didn't hesitate. "I've always wondered," she said one evening, "what it looked like. Where you held me." So we went. It was a soft gray day, the sky blanketed with clouds that kept the light gentle. Ella wore a green sweater. I wore the same necklace Theo had given me the Christmas after he learned the truth, a silver pendant that simply said, "Still here." We parked by the visitor entrance, walked through automatic glass doors. The lobby was bright, modern, filled with new mothers and old grandparents and nurses in navy scrubs, pushing carts of charts and linens. But none of that mattered, because I remembered the hallway. The one just past the elevator, now leading to records and archives, but back then, it had been maternity recovery. "I think it was down this way," I said. Ella didn't speak. We walked slowly. I could still feel the cold of that October morning, the pain in my hips, the emptiness in my arms as the nurse carried her away. And suddenly we reached it. The spot. I stopped and placed my hand on the wall. "I stood here," I said softly, "after they wheeled you out. I stood here until a nurse told me I had to go back to bed." Ella stood beside me, not touching, not speaking. But she was there. She was real. And that changed everything. We asked at the front desk if the records office was open. A kind woman with graying hair and kind eyes escorted us to a back room, shelves lined with dusty binders, file cabinets with brass handles. The walls smelled of paper and time. I gave my name, date of birth, the year. The woman returned 10 minutes later with a folder. It was slim, but inside there it was. "Baby girl Harlow born. October 6th, 1987. Mother Marianne Harlow. Time held 12 minutes. Adoptive release. Confidential per private arrangement." 12 minutes. A lifetime condensed into 12 minutes. Ella traced the line with her finger. "Was it enough?" she asked. "No," I said. "But it kept me alive." She looked up. "I always imagined we had at least one real moment." "We did." I paused. "You opened your eyes once. Just for a second. And in that second, I thought, this is the most beautiful thing I will ever see." Ella swallowed hard, then reached across the table and took my hand. We left the hospital in silence. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was reverent. A closing of the circle. That night we had dinner at my house. David grilled chicken. Theo brought his partner, a quiet man named James, who made everyone laugh with unexpected one-liners. Ella brought wine. She smiled easily now. She laughed with her whole body. And for the first time in my life, I looked around a table and didn't feel like something was missing. Not my mother. Not Leonard. Not even the version of myself I used to mourn. Because here we were, together, choosing each other. Not because we had to, but because we could. She stood in the doorway, her coat draped over one arm. "I'm going to take the new job," she said. I nodded. "It's time." She smiled. "Yeah, but I'll be back. Often. I've got roots now." She reached into her bag and pulled out a wrapped parcel. "For you." I opened it carefully. It was a photo. 2 images side by side, printed in soft sepia tones. On the left, that baby photo. Ella in the yellow blanket, eyes closed. On the right, a recent picture of the two of us sitting on the attic floor, heads close, laughing at something only we knew. Below it, she'd written, "Not everything begins at the beginning." My chest ached. I hugged her tight. And this time when I let go, I didn't feel afraid. She drove away just before midnight, and I stood on the porch watching the headlights disappear into the dark. Then I went inside, poured a cup of tea, and opened the final page of my journal. I wrote. For half my life I kept quiet, but the silence didn't protect me. It caged me. And when I finally spoke, the world didn't fall apart, it stitched itself back together, one truth at a time. This story is not about shame, It's about survival. And this ending, it's not the end at all. It's the first page of something we are finally writing together. Final words, slow emotional fade out. If you're still here, thank you for listening, for believing that no silence is final, that the truth always finds a way to rise. And if you've ever carried a story inside you, a story too heavy to say aloud, I want you to know it's never too late. You are not alone.